Hey guys, Furum here, and today I present to you the best and worst cars in each class in Asphalt 9, both for events and for multiplayer. This is now the 5th rendition of this list, and includes all the cars added from updates 11 through 14 to Asphalt 9. Big thanks to Brenton, Flash, and Rulue for helping me with these lists. I will not be going through every single car in the list individually, but rather going over some of the most notable changes and all the additions. So without further ado, let's get right to it. First up, we have Class D, in which 3 new cars have been added since the previous update to this list: the Corvette C7R, the Bentley Continental GT3, and the Porsche Taycan. Also, the Hemi has been nerfed slightly, which is why it is down a little bit lower on both lists. Please note throughout this video that the events list is based on overall lap time potential across all of the 90-second tracks in the game, and the multiplayer list is based on overall reliability and highest win rate in a standard multiplayer season. So let's get to the new cars. The first one is the Porsche Taycan, which is like a slightly better version of the Honda Civic Type R, and so sits slightly above it in both lists. It is a fairly agile car, so it is pretty good for multiplayer. And then we have the Bentley Continental GT3, which, as you can see, has the biggest discrepancy. It is decently fast, and its handling is actually very good. However, the nitro efficiency is extremely bad, and so is the drifting, and it ends up being surprisingly fast on some tracks, whereas in multiplayer it is just very unreliable due to its very poor drifting and nitro efficiency. Then we have the Chevy Corvette C7R, which is very close to the Mazda Furai in performance and can probably get very similar times in events. However, it does not have as good of handling as the Furai, so that is why it is not quite as good for multiplayer. Class C sees the addition of 4 new cars: the Lamborghini Gallardo, the Bentley Mulliner Bacalar, the Porsche 718 Cayman GT4 Club Sport, and the Chevy Corvette Stingray. Also, the SRT8 was buffed, but it was so bad before that hasn't changed its position as the worst car in Class C, and neither actually has the best car changed, the Aeronair Hasera 33, which is still the king on most tracks. However, it has a new close competitor in the Lamborghini Gallardo, which is king on some of the twistier and shorter tracks. We've also got the Bentley Mulliner Bacalar, which is close to the Gallardo in performance, but is a bit more sluggish, so it's not quite as good. Then we have the 718 Cayman GT4, which is slower, but actually a very agile car at max. Because of these 3 cars' agility and overall reliability, they form the new top 3 in the multiplayer list. The other new car in Class C is the Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, which is very similar to the Acura in terms of stats, and so it is stuck right there with it on both lists. Not as good as the other new cars, but still a pretty good Class C car. And the rest of Class C is pretty much the same. In most of the lists, the older cars will not have moved around much because there have not been many buffs and nerfs since the last update to this list. Next up, we have Class B, in which 5 new cars have been added: the McLaren F1 LM, the Porsche Carrera GT, the Apex AP0, the Ford GT Mark II, and the Porsche 911 GT1 Evolution. Class B has definitely become the most crowded class, and I understand that the text is getting a bit small on the screen, so before next time I'll have to come up with some way to make this better. So toward the bottom we have the Ford GT Mark II and the Porsche 911 GT1 Evolution, both of which are rather unremarkable cars, with the 911 GT1 just being very mediocre all around, and the Ford GT Mark II being very agile but having by far the lowest top speed in its class, so they both get slots toward the bottom of the list in both lists. But the other 3 new cars are much better. The Apex AP0 is a lot like an even better Corvette, so it gets a very high spot on the list in both cases, being an extremely agile car, than the Porsche Carrera GT. It has a faster speed than the Huracan Evo, but a lower acceleration. It can beat it on a couple of tracks, but not very many at all, and it is overshadowed overall by the other cars on top of it in the events list. And then we have the McLaren F1 LM, the new king of B-Class in events, at least on the majority of tracks. However, in multiplayer, the Huracan is still going to be more reliable overall, and it is still our B-Class multiplayer king. There have been no nerfs or buffs in Class B since the previous update to this list, so the rest of the list is the same. In Class A, there are 4 new cars this time around: the Aston Martin Valhalla, Lamborghini SC18, Porsche 911 GT2 RS Club Sport, and the Jaguar CX-75. The CX-75 is definitely the worst of this cars, although still not terrible. It's sits at low to mid class. Now, the Porsche 911 GT2 RS Club Sport, again, is like the Cayman in the fact that its top speed may not be the very best, but it is very agile overall, and so it sits very close to another super agile car, the Vanda. And then the Lamborghini SC18, we're finally getting into the top tier A-class cars. It isn't a king, but it's about as good as the McLaren 570S, slightly better, I would say. And then up at the very top, we have the Aston Martin Valhalla, which is the new A-class king both in events and multiplayer. It has very good acceleration, it is pretty much tied for the highest top speed in its class along with the 570S, and its nitro, drifting, and handling are all quite good as well. So for the first time in this list, we have a new car that is both event and multiplayer king in its class. And the rest of the Class A lists are the same. And last but not least, we have Class S, which along with Class B has had 5 cars added since the previous rendition of this list. These would be the Lamborghini Veneno, the Lamborghini Scion, the McLaren Speedtail, the BXR Bailey Blade GT1, and the SSC Tuatara. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. So the Lamborghini Veneno is pretty much about as good as the Egoista or slightly worse, so nothing much special there. Then we have the Lamborghini Scion, which is right next to a Lamborghini again, at least on the event list. That's kind of funny, but it's slightly better than the Millenio, although slightly worse than the Battista. And I would say it's actually very close to the Zenvo in terms of overall multiplayer performance. Then we have the McLaren Speedtail, which sits at a very weird but needed spot in Class S between cars like the Zenvo and Fenner and then cars like the Nemesis. It is kind of like a bridge to the higher end S-Class cars in terms of performance, although it was definitely harder to get than I think it should have been. A lot of you are probably confused as to why I put the BXR Bailey this high. Well, after the special event, it actually got a buff in the drifting, and so now it is actually super close to the Sheeran in terms of times on some tracks. Never thought I'd say that. And so it finally gets its deserved spot based on its stats right around the Trion Nemesis and the Regera. And lastly, we have the SSC Tuatara, which is debatably the overall new king of Class S, and the reason I say that is because while it is slightly better for multiplayer than the Esco, in terms of events, there hasn't been a completely settled answer in this topic, with the SSC Tuatara definitely being better on some, but the Esco then winning out on some of the S-Class Elite events. But what I will say is that if you have both of them, and one of them at higher stars than the other one, the one at higher stars is probably going to be better. So this has been my updated best and worst cars in each class list. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like the video if you have enjoyed, and consider subscribing for more Asphalt and other games content. And I will see you in my next video. Goodbye!